So we just got an update on the Bittensor white paper as it relates to DTAO, and I've got some notes. I've read through it. Actually, I've read through parts of it multiple times. We have some big changes, specifically related to emissions. In the prior white paper section around DTAO, tau could actually stop being emitted completely into the system. That has changed. Now there will be emissions of tau automatically, and we've also understood how it changes relative to the alpha tokens. Previously, the way alpha tokens were going to be emitted or inflated in the system was going to always put downward pressure on the alpha tokens. So the way that they changed it will kind of fixes this to a certain extent, but we're going to dive more into this in this video. But first, if this is your first time here, what's good? My name is Sam. For those of you who are returning, it's good to freaking see you. Okay. Also, super interesting, some other stuff related to this. Let me just pull this up here for a second. This is the most interesting section by far as it relates to some of this stuff. So let's start with the emissions schedule. So every single block, there's going to be 2 alpha tokens emitted. So when you do the math on this, right, there's 7,200 blocks, there's 64 subnets, and there's 2 per subnet, right? So 2 alpha tokens per subnet, emissions per block. That means there's like 900,000, if I do the math right. See, 64 subnets times 7,200 blocks times 2. Yeah, 921,000. Think about that. 921,000 alpha tokens emitted per day. No, I'm not like making this up. There's nearly 1 million alpha tokens emitted per day. Nearly 1 million. What do you think the price of those are going to be with that inflation? Also, very interesting, I posted this on Twitter, from switching from a validator specific like style where validators basically control the emissions schedule to DTAO, right? People are like, oh, that's so good, right? It's going to be market-based, right? Well, what does that do when you switch from a validator-based system to and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, it just changes things. When you switch to based on the stake in a subnet, you're effectively switching from validators controlling the emissions to whales controlling the emissions. So this means big players in the space are going to be the ones who control the emissions now, right? So like they're like, oh, it's so super centralized because you have 64 validators that control the emissions of the entire network, right? Okay, now we're just switching over to individuals who do exactly the same shit. Like, I don't know. I don't see anybody else talking about that, but it's like, I guess no different than anywhere else where the people with most money control everything and everybody else is just like, a peon. Scott, what's good, bro? Appreciate you being here, man. I hope you're doing well. So I found that kind of interesting because nobody else is actually talking about that, but then when you think about it, it's basically just like every other system out there. That's on the side note. Okay, so basically every single block, according to these new updated white paper around DTAO, you're going to have 3. If you look at this just as a single, like if we do the math on here, for one subnet, right? For one subnet, they're going to get emissions as in their proportion of the tau that's emitted, right? So you have the tau emissions that are going to be split across the entire network based upon the stake at each subnet level. So say 1 tau per block, right? So let's say there's 100 blocks that have passed. So you have that one, and I'm getting 5% in my subnet. So I'm getting 5 tau in my subnet. That is going to be added to the reserve pool, right? So that's the AMM pool for my subnet. But also for those 100 blocks, we have 200 alpha tokens, which are going to be split, right? So there's going to be 100 alpha tokens that are added into the reserve pool. And then there's going to be 100 that are allocated to validated. So I just want to cover this again really quick. Say if I run a subnet and there's been 100 blocks, and I've got 5% of emissions because I have 5% of the stake in the entire network on my subnet. That means I would get 5 tau. That tau is going to go into the liquidity pool on the tau reserve portion of it, right? But what does that do to the price? If you look at the constant product formula, it basically drives up the price of alpha, right? So that means the price of the alpha token is going up, but that's not it. Then there's 200 alpha tokens that are emitted in that same period of time. 100 of the alpha tokens are added to the alpha reserve in the liquidity pool. This is changing the K in the K equals X times Y portion of it, because liquidity is increasing. What is adding alpha tokens to the reserve portion of the pool due to the price? It drives up the price of tau because you're, did I say that right? Tau, if you're using tau to buy alpha effectively, hey, no! You're driving up the price of alpha if tau is coming into the pool. You're doing the reverse if alpha is coming into the pool. Hey! No! No! So this is supposed to now, it was all basically going to be lopsided in the previous documents. Now, because you have tau and alpha coming into the pool, supposedly it's going to balance. If you look at these documents again, it says tau and alpha are injected according to the balancing algorithm. So that injection of liquidity does not change its price. How that's going to happen, I'm not exactly sure. They don't give a link to any additional information. They don't explain exactly how this balancing algorithm works, right? But if 5% of the emissions are of column earning, maybe that translates to value of the alpha token, and because there's 100 alpha tokens that are being added to liquidity, maybe that's what they mean. Right, because they're adding it on both sides, so the price shouldn't change by that much. It could change one way or the other in the market. Right, you have to run the numbers on that to actually see. The rest of the alpha tokens that are emitted, right? So 100 of the 200 go into the reserve. The tau goes into the reserve. The other 100 alpha tokens, where do they go? They are going to the validator, who is then going to distribute them according to the previous schedule, right? Because there was some ambiguity around could subnet owners change the incentives? Well, they can't change these incentives. They can change the other incentives for how miners actually get this 41% or how validators actually get this 41%. And then if somebody wants to unstake, they basically they're getting their proportion of alpha token based on their stake within that validator, right? So if that validator was the only validator in that subnet, they got 100 alpha tokens after 100 blocks on the blockchain, then if the validator doesn't shave some off the top, right? Because they do, right? They're providing a service, right? So they might take 5%, 10%, 50%, whatever it is that they take. But let's assume they don't take anything. Then that person would get 100 alpha tokens. Now, if that person wants to, they could take that 100 alpha tokens plus the rest of the alpha that they have in that pool or at that validator, and they would go to the liquidity pool. You can't trade these, right? So it's not like people were like, you could trade them. You cannot trade them. If you're buying alpha, you're not actually receiving anything that you can do anything with. Your alpha you're purchasing is going directly to the hotkey in a validator. Basically, it's going from tau to alpha. The alpha that is received goes directly to the validator. And the validator, when you take your money out of there, goes back into the liquidity pool, right? So you're adding alpha to the liquidity pool and you're buying tau. When you buy something, what happens to the price? It goes up, right? So you're basically decreasing the price of the alpha by taking your money out of the pool, which is going to be very interesting because there's a lot of liquidity risk here. There's going to be a ton of liquidity risk. The whales are just basically going to be controlling everything. I was literally getting ready to fire 200 mg of testosterone and anything when your live came on. I wasn't aware of the other craft speaking on. I'll have to watch again full couple of times off live. Yeah, I'm going to do a video on testosterone probably soon. Okay, so another thing that I found interesting as I was reading through these, the subnet owners, when you register a subnet, previously you would lock up your tokens, and then when you finished with that, the register, say if your subnet got deregistered, you would get all of your emissions back, or all of your tau back. Well, that's changing. The cost for a subnet is actually going to be burned now. So this is going to be removing them from circulation. But I've also heard that the price is going to go down on the registration. So I don't know the mechanism and how that's actually going to take place to reduce the cost of registering for a subnet. One last thing on staking here. Tau dividends are sourced from the protocol automatically swapping a portion of the alpha dividends to tau through the subnet's liquidity pool during distribution. So this is in regards to the distribution of rewards. So what effectively my interpretation of this is that if you're staking at the subnet 0, used to be called the root subnet, then you're going to be earning a small proportion of extra tau, it sounds like, that is earned from that validator on the individual subnets that it is also validating on. So let me paraphrase that. The validators can validate on multiple different subnets. So if you have a staker at subnet 0 that stakes in, say, validator A, validator A is also a validator on many other subnets and gets a higher position of value in that subnet due to its total ranking, because it has a large pool of tau in the subnet 0, plus it gets the additional stake in each one of the subnets, then that extra benefit from the tau, at least initially, and it appears that this is going to change as time goes on, but at least initially, that extra benefit from ranking higher from that is then going to be converted from the alpha tokens in the distribution back into tau, and then to the participants who are staking there, so that you can earn tau if you prefer, or the actual alpha tokens related to that. As I'm going through and looking at this more and more, it continues to remind me of like the Apple Store, right? Where you think of like the Apple Store as, say, Bittensor, and each individual app in the App Store is a subnet. The developers of each app are like the miners and the validators. And then the users are going to be people who download the apps and the iPhone, versus users of services that tie into Bittensor. So this could be a subnet service or product that comes out, but it could also be a company that uses like an API call to any one of the subnets to do inferencing or do some type of data gathering or something along those lines, so that outside money or outside user is similar to the users that are downloading apps. And anytime you can design a system where you have more players in that system, or like the pie basically expands to the number of people who can benefit, right? Then that's setting things up for explosive growth, because you have the App Store, which is basically Bittensor, that's a DTAO, everything. So in terms of Apple, they take 30% of the pie, right, from all the subnets or from the App Store, right? In Bittensor, they're taking all the value. There's not 30% of it. They're basically taking all the value from it. So any outside money that is generated through USD, not through alpha or tau emissions, that's going to be decided how the subnet wants to use that, or like I could use an API call of one of the subnets to do inference for, say, an AI agent or something along those lines. And the value I can get from that is having a lower cost from there. So like you're going to get more users on board. You're going to get more developers, which are going to be the miners and the validators, because the way that the system's set up allows that to actually be incentivized to contribute to the network. So I'd love to hear your thoughts down below, and I will leave this with an awkward ending like I normally do.